For centuries, historians have minimized or entirely erased the profound impact of Black Africans on the trajectory of European history, relegating their achievements to footnotes or dismissing them altogether. In this video, I will seek to restore two critical chapters of this hidden history: the nearly 8th century reign of the Moors in Spain and Portugal, and the central role played by Nubian priests in spreading one of the ancient world's most influential religions, the so-called Isis cult, throughout the Roman Empire. These are not peripheral stories. They represent transformative moments when African agency, sophistication, and cultural power fundamentally altered the course of European civilization. The Moors rescued Europe from the Dark Ages, reintroducing the classical knowledge that would spark what would be later called the Renaissance. The Nubian priests preserved and propagated the worship of Isis, creating a spiritual bridge between Africa and the Mediterranean world that endured for over a millennium. Together, these narratives challenge us to reimagine the very foundations of what we call Western civilization. The story of the Moors begins not in Spain, but in North Africa. In 639 AD, Arab armies swept into Egypt as part of the great Islamic expansion known as the Jihad, a military and religious campaign aimed at spreading Islam and establishing political control across the known world. By this time, the indigenous Black populations of Egypt, the descendants of the great pharaonic civilization, had largely migrated to other regions of Africa or had been absorbed through centuries of intermarriage with successive waves of lighter-skinned invaders who had ended indigenous African rule over Egypt a millennium earlier. Intermarriage and centuries of mixing resulted in the last remaining group of people in modern-day Egypt with any link to ancient Egypt, the Copts. We have explored the history of the Copts in an older video. After securing Egypt and appropriating its vast repositories of knowledge, the Arab armies turned westward toward the Maghreb, the region of North Africa that today comprises Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. In the 7th century, this region was predominantly Black, inhabited by the original Berbers, the indigenous African peoples whom the Romans had called Maures or Mauros, a Latin term meaning black. These were the Moors, and their homeland was known as Mauritania, literally the country of the blacks. The Moors were formidable warriors with a reputation for invincibility. When the Arab armies invaded their territories, the Moors mounted a fierce resistance that lasted for 30 years, often led by women commanders. They had been partially Christianized by the Romans, though many still practiced their ancestral vitalist religion, worshipping Amun or Ammon as their supreme deity, the same god who had been central to ancient Egyptian religion. Despite their legendary fighting prowess, the Moors were eventually defeated, and Mauritania was forcibly converted to Islam. By 711 AD, Europe had descended into what historians call the Dark Ages. The once mighty Roman Empire had collapsed, and the continent had regressed into a state of semi-barbarism, characterized by widespread illiteracy, economic stagnation, and cultural decline. It was into this vacuum that the Moors, under the command of the African general Tariq ibn Ziyad, launched their invasion of the Iberian Peninsula. The first wave consisted of 7,000 men, of whom an astounding 6,700 were Black Africans. This was not a minor skirmish, but the beginning of a conquest that would reshape European history. The Moorish forces were welcomed by the local population, who had grown weary of the oppressive Visigothic rulers. The Spanish king Alfonso X, known as the Wise, described this invasion in vivid terms. All the Moorish soldiers were dressed in silk and black wool acquired by force, Their black faces were like pitch, and the most handsome among them was black, like a cooking pot. The racial composition of the Moorish armies is further confirmed by the Chanson de Roland, which means Song of Roland, the famous French epic poem that recounts the 8th century battles between the Franks and the Africans in northern Spain. The poem describes the Moorish forces with unmistakable clarity. At the head advances the Saracen Abysm, and he is black as melted pitch. Ethiopia, meaning burnt faces, or Africa in Greek, a cursed land indeed. The blacks who come from there are under his command. These people who have broad noses and large ears, and there are more than 50,000 in company. When Roland sees the incredible race, these hordes and hordes blacker than the blackest of inks, of white there is nothing but the teeth. This description leaves no room for ambiguity. The Moors were overwhelmingly black Africans, and their physical appearance made a profound and lasting impression on the Europeans they encountered. The Moorish conquest did not stop at the Pyrenees. Emboldened by their success in Spain, the Moorish armies, under both African and Arab command, pushed northward into France, seeking to extend their dominion over all of Europe. They penetrated deep into French territory before being halted at the Battle of Poitiers in 732 AD by Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne. This battle is often portrayed in European historiography as a heroic defense of Christendom against the Saracen hordes, but it was in reality a check on African and Arab expansion into northern Europe. Forced to retreat, the Moors consolidated their control over Spain, Portugal, and Sicily, territories they would dominate for more than 7 centuries. During this period, they transformed these regions into centers of learning, culture, and prosperity that far surpassed anything in Christian Europe. The Moorish presence in Spain was organized under several successive dynasties, the most significant being the Almoravids and the Almohades. The Almoravid movement began in the Sahara when a king named Yahya ibn Ibrahim attempted to Islamize his vitalist or so-called animist subjects. He brought back from Mecca a religious leader named Ibn Yasin, who initially failed to convert the people and was driven out. Yasin fled to Senegal, where he gained followers and eventually launched a jihad, with Yahya as his military commander. They conquered Morocco, giving birth to the Almoravid Empire. Yahya's brother and successor, Abu Bakr, expanded the empire from Tangier in Morocco to the Senegal River. In 1075, he destroyed the powerful empire of Ghana, opening 160 years of chaos in West Africa and leaving the region vulnerable to Arab Muslim slave traders. Abu Bakr's cousin and successor, Yusuf ibn Tachfin, founder of the city of Marrakesh, is described in contemporary documents as a man with brown skin and kinky hair. Tachfin consolidated the empire and, responding to calls for help from Moors and Arabs threatened by Christian forces in Spain, crossed into Europe and conquered the Iberian Peninsula, creating a vast empire that included Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Algeria, Western Sahara, and Mauritania, with Marrakesh as its capital. The Almoravids were succeeded by the Almohades, the fourth and final Moorish dynasty, which continued to strengthen the sciences and arts in Spain. However, by the early 13th century, the Moors began to suffer military defeats at the hands of the resurgent Christian kingdoms of the north. The Moorish occupation of Spain represents one of the most remarkable periods of cultural and scientific achievement in human history. While Christian Europe languished in ignorance and superstition, Al-Andalus, that is, Moorish Spain, became a beacon of enlightenment. The Moors transformed the urban landscape of Spain in ways that would not be replicated in Christian Europe for centuries. They paved roads, constructed sidewalks, and installed street lighting, making cities navigable and safe at night, a luxury unknown in most of medieval Europe. They built hundreds of public bathhouses and mosques, introduced floral gardens, and installed sophisticated systems of heating, air conditioning, and indoor plumbing that brought running water directly into homes. These amenities were not limited to the wealthy, they were available to the general population, reflecting a level of public infrastructure that would not be seen again in Europe until the modern era. The city of Cordoba became the jewel of Moorish Spain, with a population of 1 million inhabitants. It boasted 200,000 middle-class homes, 60,000 noble residences, and 80,000 shops, including 20,000 bookstores, an astonishing number that speaks to the literacy and intellectual curiosity of the population. By comparison, the largest libraries in Christian Europe at the time contained only a few hundred manuscripts. The Moors established 17 universities in Spain at a time when Christian Europe had only 2. These institutions became centers of learning where students from across Europe came to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and the natural sciences. The Moors democratized education, making it accessible to people of all social classes, and founded medical schools that were at the cutting edge of contemporary knowledge. The Moors reintroduced to Europe the classical works of Greek philosophy and science that had been lost during the collapse of the Roman Empire. They translated the writings of Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, and other ancient thinkers from Greek and Syriac into Arabic, adding their own commentaries and innovations. European scholars would later translate these Arabic texts into Latin, sparking the intellectual revival that led to the Renaissance. In mathematics, the Moors introduced the numeral system to Europe, replacing the cumbersome Roman numerals and making complex calculations possible. They made groundbreaking advances in algebra, trigonometry, and geometry. In astronomy, they built observatories and created detailed star charts that would guide European navigators for centuries. In medicine, Moorish physicians pioneered surgical techniques, developed new pharmaceuticals, and wrote comprehensive medical encyclopedias that remained standard textbooks in European universities well into the 17th century. One of the most celebrated figures of Moorish Spain was Ziryab, a black polymath whose influence on European culture cannot be overstated. A botanist, geographer, musician, and astronomer, Ziryab revolutionized courtly life in Cordoba with innovations that seem mundane today but were revolutionary in the 9th century. He replaced gold plates with crystal glassware, introduced the concept of serving meals in multiple courses with dessert at the end, and revolutionized fashion by promoting the idea of changing one's wardrobe 4 times a year to match the seasons. His contributions to music were equally profound. He added a 5th string to the lute and developed new musical modes that influenced both Arabic and European music for centuries. The architectural legacy of the Moors is perhaps their most visible and enduring contribution to European civilization. The Great Mosque of Cordoba, with its forest of columns and distinctive horseshoe arches, remains one of the most breathtaking examples of Islamic architecture in the world. The Alhambra Palace in Granada, with its intricate stucco work, colorful tile mosaics, and serene courtyards, represents the pinnacle of Moorish artistic achievement. The Alcazar in Seville and the Aljaferia in Zaragoza are further testaments to the Moors' architectural genius. These buildings were so admired that when the Spanish Christians reconquered these cities, they chose to preserve and inhabit them rather than destroy them. The Alhambra, in particular, became a residence for Spanish royalty and remains one of Spain's most visited tourist attractions today. What distinguishes Moorish architecture is its emphasis on vibrant color, intricate geometric patterns, and the integration of water features and gardens, concepts deeply rooted in African and Islamic aesthetics. As one historian noted, there is no doubt that Moorish or Moroccan imperial civilization produced the most sophisticated Black and African architecture after that of the Egyptian Sudanese civilization. Contrary to the religious intolerance that characterized much of medieval Europe, Moorish Spain was a place of remarkable religious pluralism. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side, and while Muslims held political power, they generally allowed Christians and Jews to practice their faiths freely. The Moors even had a say in the appointment of Christian bishops within their territories. This atmosphere of tolerance fostered a unique cultural synthesis, with scholars of all three faiths collaborating on translations and scientific research. The status of women in Moorish Spain also stood in stark contrast to the situation in both Christian Europe and the Arab world. While women rarely held the highest political offices, they enjoyed significant freedoms. They were not required to wear veils, they could work in all professions, and they participated actively in public life. This relative gender equality was a reflection of both Islamic legal traditions and the influence of pre-Islamic African societies, where women often held positions of power and authority. No honest account of Moorish civilization can ignore its participation in the enslavement of Europeans. From the 8th century onward, the Moors and Arabs captured European Christians, primarily as prisoners of war, and sold them into slavery. Men were put to work in manual labor, served in royal guards, or were elevated to important administrative positions. Women were often placed in the harems of rulers and wealthy men. Jewish merchants, who lived freely in Moorish territories, were active participants in this trade, operating castration centers where male slaves were made into eunuchs. Europeans were deported to North Africa to be enslaved, and this trade was a major factor in the gradual whitening of the Mediterranean coast of the Maghreb, as enslaved Europeans intermarried with the local population over generations. This slave trade continued even after the fall of Moorish Spain, with North Africans, Arabs, and Ottoman Turks conducting raids on European coastal towns well into the 19th century. It is crucial to note, however, that the West African, Central African, and East African peoples who would later be enslaved by Europeans from the 15th century onward had no connection to this earlier trade. The transatlantic slave trade, which gave rise to the destructive system of white supremacy and its ongoing devastation, was an entirely separate and far more catastrophic phenomenon. The Christian reconquest of Spain, known as the Reconquista, began in earnest in the 11th century and proceeded gradually over the next 400 years. The Moors were slowly pushed southward as the Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Portugal expanded their territories. The final blow came in 1492 when Abu Abdillah, known to Europeans as Boabdil, the Black Muslim regent and general of Granada, was defeated after an 8-month siege by the unified Christian armies of Ferdinand and Isabella. The fall of Granada marked the end of nearly 8 centuries of Moorish rule in Europe. Approximately 3.5 million Black Africans living in Spain and Portugal were forced to flee back to Africa or disperse throughout Europe. Those who remained were compelled to convert to Christianity or face expulsion and death. The Inquisition, which had been established to root out heresy, turned its attention to these converts, known as Moriscos, subjecting them to persecution and forced assimilation. The expulsion of the Moors and Jews from Spain was a cultural catastrophe. The scientific archives accumulated over centuries were burned, though the knowledge that had already been translated into Latin survived and would fuel the European Renaissance. Ironically, in the same year that Granada fell, Christopher Columbus set sail for the New World, using the advanced navigational techniques that the Moors had introduced to Europe. The influence of the Moors on European culture extends far beyond architecture and science. The Spanish and Portuguese languages are filled with words of Arabic origin, from algebra and algorithm to orange and sugar. Flamenco music and dance, often considered quintessentially Spanish, bear the unmistakable influence of Moorish musical traditions. The concept of chivalry and courtly love, central to medieval European literature, was heavily influenced by the refined culture of Moorish courts. Even the flag of Sardinia, an island of Italy, bears witness to the Moorish presence in Europe. It features the severed heads of 4 Moorish princes of the Almoravid dynasty, depicted with distinctly black features, a grim reminder of the wars between Christians and Moors. While the Moors were transforming Spain, another profound story of African influence was unfolding across the Mediterranean. The worship of Isis, the Egyptian goddess of healing and motherhood, had become one of the most popular religions in the Roman Empire. From Britain to the Black Sea, from Spain to Syria, temples dedicated to Isis drew devotees from all walks of life, offering them the promise of salvation, healing, and a personal relationship with the divine. The cult of Isis was, at its core, an African religion. Isis had been worshipped in Egypt since at least the 5th dynasty, circa 2465 to 2323 BC, where she was revered as the wife of Osiris, the god of the dead and the underworld, and the mother of Horus, the god of kingship. Her mythology was central to Egyptian concepts of royal power and the afterlife. According to legend, when Osiris was murdered and dismembered by his brother Seth, Isis used her magical powers to reassemble his body and bring him back to life, conceiving Horus in the process. This story of death, resurrection, and divine motherhood resonated deeply with people across the ancient world. The worship of Isis spread beyond Egypt during the Hellenistic period, following the conquests of Alexander the Great. By the 1st century BC, the cult had reached Rome, where it quickly gained a devoted following, despite periodic attempts by Roman authorities to suppress it. The appeal of Isis was universal. Unlike many Roman cults, which were restricted to specific social classes or genders, the worship of Isis was open to all, men and women, rich and poor, slave and free. This inclusivity, combined with the promise of personal salvation and the performance of elaborate, emotionally engaging rituals, made the Isis cult one of the most successful religious movements of the ancient world. The connection between Nubia and the worship of Isis was ancient and profound. The kingdom of Kush, also known as Nubia, located in what is now Sudan, had been Egypt's southern neighbor for millennia. The relationship between Egypt and Nubia was complex, characterized by periods of conflict, trade, cultural exchange, and political union. During the 8th century BC, Kushite kings conquered Egypt and ruled it as the 25th dynasty, bringing a renaissance of traditional Egyptian culture and religion. The great temple of Isis at Philae, located on an island in the Nile near the border between Egypt and Nubia, became the most important center of Isis worship in the ancient world. The island's very name, Pilak, meaning island of time or island of extremity, may have been of Nubian origin. The earliest evidence of major construction at Philae dates to the reign of the renowned Black Pharaoh Taharqa, who commissioned a temple complex dedicated to Amun, the chief deity of both Egypt and Kush. For the Nubians, Philae was not merely an Egyptian temple that they visited. It was a sacred space that belonged to them as much as to the Egyptians. The temple complex included shrines dedicated to specifically Nubian deities, such as Arensnufis, a local god of Lower Nubia, depicted as a desert hunter and companion of Isis, sometimes appearing as a lion, and Mandulis, a Nubian sun god associated with the nomadic Blemi people. The connection between Nubia and the worship of Isis was ancient and profound. The kingdom of Kush, also known as Nubia, located in what is now Sudan, had been Egypt's southern neighbor for millennia. The relationship between Egypt and Nubia was complex, characterized by periods of conflict, trade, cultural exchange, and political union. During the 8th century BC, Kushite kings conquered Egypt and ruled it as the 25th dynasty, bringing a renaissance of traditional Egyptian culture and religion. The great temple of Isis at Philae, located on an island in the Nile near the border between Egypt and Nubia, became the most important center of Isis worship in the ancient world. The island's very name, Pilak, meaning island of time or island of extremity, may have been of Nubian origin. The earliest evidence of major construction at Philae dates to the reign of the renowned Black Pharaoh Taharqa, 690 to 664 BC, who commissioned a temple complex dedicated to Amun, the chief deity of both Egypt and Kush. For the Nubians, Philae was not merely an Egyptian temple that they visited. It was a sacred space that belonged to them as much as to the Egyptians. The temple complex included shrines dedicated to specifically Nubian deities, such as Arensnufis, a local god of Lower Nubia depicted as a desert hunter and companion of Isis, sometimes appearing as a lion, and Mandulis, a Nubian sun god associated with the nomadic Blemi people. A kiosk built during the reign of Pharaoh Nectanebo I, who reigned 380 to 362 BC, was likely used as a shrine for Thoth Pnups, a hybrid Nubian-Egyptian god whose name links him to the ancient Nubian city of Kerma. The role of Nubians at Philae was not limited to pilgrimage. They were active participants in the temple's administration and rituals, eventually becoming the dominant force in preserving the worship of Isis long after it had died out elsewhere in Egypt. Research by Egyptologist Solange Ashby of UCLA has identified at least 98 inscriptions at Philae written on behalf of Nubians, primarily in Greek Demotic, a script used for writing ancient Egyptian, and the Nubians' own Meroitic script. These inscriptions reveal that Nubians were not merely pilgrims, but held high-ranking positions as priests, temple administrators, and royal representatives. The Nubian presence at Philae can be divided into several distinct periods. During this period, local Nubian leaders of cult organizations and village elders were active at Philae. Their inscriptions, written in Demotic on the walls of temples dedicated to Nubian gods, record mandatory donations to temple singers and to specific temples, including those honoring Arensnufis and Thoth Pnups. This period represents the height of Nubian power at Philae. Inscriptions from this era show that Nubians had risen to the top of the religious hierarchy, claiming the loftiest titles such as Prophet of Isis, Purity Priest, King Son of Kush, and Royal Scribe of Kush. These inscriptions were made in the most restricted and sacred areas of the temples, indicating that Nubians had full access to the inner sanctums of the cult. The inscriptions also reveal that these Nubian priests possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge and were fluent in Egyptian, Greek, and Meroitic. Most prominent among them were 5 generations of the Guayaquil family, powerful priests who held both religious and military obligations. According to Egyptologist Jeremy Pope of the College of William and Mary, in addition to being a focus of sincere piety, theological reflection, and communal bonds, the worship of Isis would also have been important to elite Nubian families like the Guayaquiles as an occupation, a mark of social status, and thus a source of political power. Many of the inscriptions from this period refer to the annual Festival of Entry, a celebration honoring Osiris and Isis. While some Egyptian names appear in references to the festival, the majority of participants were Nubian, particularly members of the Guayaquil family. One of the most remarkable inscriptions at Philae was commissioned by Sasan, an envoy from the kings of Meroe to Rome. Dated to April 10th, 253 AD, this 26-line text is not only the longest demotic inscription at Philae, but the longest known anywhere in Egypt. In it, Sasan describes how he was commanded by the king of Meroe to set aside funds and throw a lavish party for the entire district. The inscription reveals that Nubian pilgrims and priests arriving at Philae played both political and religious roles. When these Nubian priests came, the local population would have been so excited to see them arriving on their majestic ships down the Nile. They knew that the Nubians were coming with pounds and pounds of gold, and that part of that money would be used to buy and slaughter animals and to provide beer, music, and dancing. The entire district, the inscription says, celebrated for 8 days in the forecourt of the Isis temple. From a long colonnade along the west side of the island, people could watch as Sasan crossed the Nile with his entourage to the Abaton sanctuary on the nearby island of Biga, where Osiris was believed to be buried, to perform the sacred rites. The Nubians did not simply adopt Egyptian religious practices wholesale. They actively shaped and enriched the cult of Isis with their own cultural traditions. One of the most significant Nubian contributions was the practice of milk libations. In traditional Egyptian ritual, libations to Osiris were typically made with water or wine, poured from small bottles. At Philae, however, reliefs depict Ptolemaic pharaohs offering Osiris libations of milk, poured from a citula, a long, narrow vessel with a looped handle. Hieroglyphs accompanying these scenes explicitly state that the milk comes from the breast of Hesat, a celestial cow goddess. Solange Ashby argues that this was a distinctly Nubian practice adopted at Philae. The earliest depictions of milk libations are found not in Egypt proper, but in Lower Nubia, at the Temple of Dhaka, in a sanctuary built by the Meroitic king Achaemani, 275 to 250 BC. Milk libations are also depicted in royal funeral chapels farther south in Upper Nubia, at sites like the Temple of Musawarat Esufra, where reliefs show herdsmen preparing milk offerings for the Nubian lion-headed god Apedamak. At Philae, milk was referred to as Ankwas, meaning life and power. As Ashby explains, milk seems to be infused with this magical element of transferring life and power to the one who is deceased, much in the way that the breast milk of a mother keeps her infant alive and growing. There seems to be this connection in the mind of Nubians. For the Nubians, who were largely pastoralists, milk was the ideal offering to aid in the rebirth of Osiris. Ashby notes that, until quite recently, milk played a central role in death rituals in Nubia. Within living memory, a widow would traditionally pour milk on her husband's grave on the second day after his death. A distant echo, perhaps, of the ancient milk libations offered to Osiris. The inscriptions left by Nubian pilgrims and priests at Philae are markedly different from those left by Greeks and Egyptians. While Greek inscriptions tend to be short and formulaic, and Egyptian inscriptions dry and repetitive, Nubian inscriptions are much more heartfelt, longer, and more reverent toward Isis, according to Ashby. They often contain dramatic, emotional phrases, such as, "I am bending my arm, I am calling out to you, Isis." These prayers were likely recited aloud in front of the reliefs and statues depicting Isis and Osiris, creating a deeply personal and emotional connection between the worshipper and the divine. Nubian inscriptions tend to be clustered in particular buildings at Philae, such as the Gate of Hadrian and a room in the Temple of Isis, known as the Meroitic Chamber. Significantly, Nubians seem to have been especially interested in leaving inscriptions near depictions of milk libations, reinforcing the importance of this ritual in Kushite religious practice. As Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries AD, the traditional religions of Egypt and Rome were systematically suppressed. Temples were closed, statues were destroyed, and priests were persecuted. Yet at Philae, the worship of Isis endured, sustained almost entirely by the devotion of its Nubian adherents. In 452 AD, the Nubian Blemi people negotiated a treaty with Rome that guaranteed them the right to continue worshipping at Philae and to take a sacred statue of Isis to Nubia once a year. This remarkable concession speaks to the political and religious importance of the Isis cult to the Nubians, even as the rest of the Roman world was converting to Christianity. During this final period of pagan worship at Philae, approximately 408 to 456 AD, a Nubian family known as the Esmets served as priests for 3 generations, eventually attaining the rank of first prophet of Isis, the highest priestly position. However, the inscriptions they left were in isolated and marginal areas of the temple complex, suggesting that they no longer had access to the most sacred spaces, which had likely been appropriated by Christians. They even made inscriptions on the roof of the Isis temple, probably to avoid scrutiny by Christian authorities. One demotic inscription on the western wall of the temple of Isis refers to an abominable command, possibly an allusion to the 435 AD edict of the Roman Emperor Theodosius II, R. 408 to 450 AD, that called for the destruction of all pagan temples in the empire. The last demotic inscription was written in 452 AD on the roof of the Temple of Isis, and the last pagan Greek inscription was made in 456 AD. Perhaps nothing better illustrates the central role of Nubians in preserving ancient Egyptian religion than the final hieroglyphic inscription ever written. Carved in 394 AD inside the Gate of Hadrian at Philae, this inscription was made by Esmet Akom, a member of the Esmet priestly family. It accompanies a depiction of the Nubian sun god Mandulis and refers to words spoken by the god for all time and eternity. As Solange Ashby observes, this final hieroglyphic inscription was made for a Nubian god. For her, it comes as no surprise that the site where the last Egyptian hieroglyphs were written was, in fact, a sacred Nubian space. This poignant final testament serves as a powerful reminder that the preservation of ancient Egyptian culture in its final centuries was largely the work of African peoples from the south, not the Egyptians themselves. In 536 AD, the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565 AD, sent a military contingent to Philae to arrest the priests of Isis, stamp out pagan worship and seize the island's treasures for Constantinople. With this act, the last temple of the ancient Egyptian religion was closed, and a tradition that had endured for more than 3,000 years came to an end. The influence of Nubian priests extended far beyond the borders of Egypt. As the cult of Isis spread throughout the Roman Empire, Nubian priests traveled with it, carrying their traditions and rituals to the far reaches of the Mediterranean world. Stunning visual evidence of this diaspora comes from the ruins of Herculaneum, a wealthy Roman city that, like its more famous neighbor Pompeii, was buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. During excavations in the 18th century, archaeologists discovered a series of frescoes depicting Isiac ceremonies. One particularly vivid painting shows a ritual taking place at an Isis temple, with priests and worshippers gathered on the steps of a sanctuary flanked by sphinxes and other Egyptian motifs. What is most striking about this fresco is the prominent depiction of black priests. The painting shows a white-robed priestly figure at the summit of the temple steps, holding a jar of sacred Nile water before the curtained portal of the sanctuary. On either side of the central figure stand two men holding sistrums, sacred rattles used in Isis worship. One of these men is plainly black, his gleaming bronze skin contrasting with the light ochre pleats of his robe. Below, 5 priestly figures lead facing ranks of celebrants in a ritual of sacrifice and singing. 3 of these priests are black, with shaved heads and pale-colored linen robes cinched at breast level, the traditional attire of Isiac priests. In the lower right corner of the fresco, another black man sits, playing a long, slender, flute-like instrument. All of the black figures, except the musician, have been identified by scholars as Zakharoi, or senior attendants to the priest, who served for specified terms of office. A companion fresco from Herculaneum, likely recovered from the same site, shows similarly dressed figures officiating at a ceremony dominated by a black man dancing within a shrine. These images, created during the 30-year period preceding the eruption of Vesuvius, approximately 49 to 79 AD, provide invaluable evidence of the widespread presence of black Africans in the Isiac priesthood throughout the Roman world. Scholarly investigation of these frescoes has sought to determine how accurately they depict the actual rituals and personnel of the Isis cult. The consensus among historians is that while the scenes may contain some artistic embellishments, they are fundamentally accurate representations of Isiac worship and the prominent role of black priests within it. The preeminence of Philae as the Nile sanctuary of Isis, located near the northern border with Nubia, provides the key to understanding this phenomenon. Given the long-standing involvement of the black civilization of Nubia with the worship of Isis, the service of black priests at Philae from a very early date seems beyond doubt, according to scholars at Harvard's Image of the Black in Western Art Archive. These dark-skinned officiants would then have moved out through the Mediterranean as the cult expanded during the Greco-Roman period, lending their image to the popular impression of this exotic religion. As the cult spread, the ranks of Nubian priests would have been joined by blacks already living in the diaspora throughout the Roman Empire. Still, a general association persisted between all blacks in the priesthood and the Egyptian homeland of Isis worship. As the eminent scholar Frank Snowden has demonstrated, closely observed images of blacks as acrobats, bath attendants, singers, dancers, and even philosophers provide testimony to the widespread and continual presence of black people in the cosmopolitan environment that was ancient Rome. To this diverse cast of characters can reasonably be added that of the spiritual conductor of souls, in the quest for immortality, the priest of Isis who guided devotees through the mysteries of death and rebirth. The stories of the Moors in Spain and the Nubian priests of Rome are not peripheral curiosities in the grand narrative of world history. They are central chapters that reveal the profound and enduring impact of African peoples on the development of European civilization. For nearly 8 centuries, Black Africans ruled over Spain and Portugal, transforming these regions into centers of learning, culture, and scientific innovation that far surpassed anything in Christian Europe. The knowledge they preserved and expanded would later fuel the European Renaissance, yet their contributions have been systematically erased or minimized in conventional historical narratives. Similarly, the Nubian priests who spread the worship of Isis throughout the Roman Empire were not mere footnotes in the history of ancient religion. They were the guardians of a spiritual tradition that offered millions of people across the Mediterranean world hope, healing, and the promise of eternal life. When the worship of Isis finally died out in Egypt, it was the Nubians who kept it alive for another century, and it was a Nubian priest who carved the last hieroglyphic inscription in human history, a final testament to the enduring power of African spirituality. These narratives challenge us to fundamentally rethink the conventional story of Western civilization. They reveal that what we call Western culture is in fact a synthesis of contributions from many peoples and civilizations, with Africans playing a far more central role than is commonly acknowledged. The Moors did not simply occupy Spain, they rescued Europe from the Dark Ages and laid the intellectual foundations for the modern world. The Nubian priests did not simply practice an Egyptian religion, they transformed it, enriched it with their own cultural traditions, and carried it to the far corners of the known world. By reclaiming these forgotten chapters of history, we honor the memory of those who came before us and challenge the narratives of racial hierarchy and cultural superiority that have been used to justify centuries of oppression and exploitation. We recognize that African peoples have always been active agents in shaping the course of human history, not passive victims or peripheral observers. And we affirm that the contributions of African civilizations to art, science, philosophy, and spirituality are not merely worthy of acknowledgement. They are essential to understanding who we are and how we came to be. The legacy of the Moors and the Nubian priests endures not only in the monuments they left behind, but in the very fabric of European culture. Every time a student studies algebra, every time a musician plays a lute, every time a visitor marvels at the Alhambra, they are encountering the living legacy of African genius. It is time to tell these stories in full, without apology or equivocation, and to restore African peoples to their rightful place in the history of human civilization. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.